The reading for the sermon today is 1 Kings chapter 8. When Solomon had finished all these prayers and supplications to the Lord, he rose from before the altar of the Lord, where he had been kneeling with his hands spread out toward heaven. He stood and blessed the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us, as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us nor forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him and keep his commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God, and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands, as at this time." Then the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to the Lord, 22,000 cattle, and 120,000 sheep and goats. So the king and all the Israelites dedicated the temple of the Lord. The word of the Lord. Well, grace, mercy, and peace be yours today in rich abundance as we get to dive a little bit more deeply into 1 Kings chapter 8, this really interesting section of the very end of a worship service in the Old Testament, where Solomon was dedicating the temple of God to the Lord. What we're going to learn today is that they spent a lot of money, there was a lot of effort, and there were a lot of decisions that they had to make in order to get that temple built. And on that day, when they were worshiping the Lord that day during the dedication of the temple, I would imagine that there were many people who were wondering, as they were seeing the temple, the inside of it, maybe for the first time, as they were seeing the very first worship service there, if they were trying to answer this question, what I have on the screen, well, was it all worth it? Was all the money, was all of the giving, were all of the decisions, was all of the time, was it worth it? It's interesting because here at St. Matthew's, I think in a few months, we're going to be asking that question, but with a different tense. Not was it worth it, but is it worth it? If you were here a couple of weeks ago, we had a congregational meeting where we gathered together and we learned what one of the committees here has been working on. That they've been working on trying to mitigate and fix the 5 or 6 step problem that we have. All of you walked up about 5 or 6 steps to get into the sanctuary today. There's no way for somebody who has physical disabilities to make it up those steps. If you were here a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this and said what we decided to do is we're going to spend a little bit of money to contract an engineering firm where they're going to look at the plans we have if we should spend a whole lot of money to put an elevator in and maybe a couple of extra spaces. If you were here a couple of weeks ago, you got some of that information. If you weren't, you're getting that information now. And I'm wondering if in a few weeks or a few months, when the number comes back, the guaranteed maximum price for that project, if when you see that, if your eyebrows might raise a little bit and your eyeballs might get a little bit big, because most likely it's going to be a number that you haven't seen in your own personal finances. And you're going to have to ask the question, along with everybody else here at St. Matthew's, is this worth it? To commit this money in a loan, to do the rest of the work necessary to get it done, to make the decisions, should we do this or that? And unfortunately, we're not all going to be on the same page all of the time. Is it worth it to have to deal with some of those tough, hard feelings? Is it worth it? Well, the people of Israel, I'm guessing that many of them came to that worship service that day as Solomon dedicated the temple, and they were trying to get those questions answered. Was it worth it? All of the gifts that they put towards it, all of the work, all of the decisions. If it's been a while since you've cracked open 1 Kings chapter 8, I guess I wouldn't blame you. It's a section of the Bible that we don't go to very often, and you kind of need more than 1 Kings 8 to understand what's going on. you have to read the parallel book in the book of Chronicles. Did you know that the books of Chronicles and the books of Kings are kind of parallel? They tell basically the same story, but from a different perspective. And if we go to the book of Chronicles, we get to learn a little bit more about what it took to build the temple. We learn that it was Solomon's dad, King David, who gathered all of the resources. It was like he had a capital campaign to gather all of the resources necessary to build that building. From 1 Chronicles chapter 22, we get to learn from David himself as he says, this is what he gathered to build he gathered to have the materials to build the temple. David said, and the chronicler recorded, I have taken great pains to provide for the temple of the Lord, 100,000 talents of gold. Now, we don't need to necessarily know right now what a talent is. I know we don't use that. But anytime you have the number 100,000 attached to gold, that's going to be a lot. What comes next? 1,000,000 talents of silver. The same thing stands. 1,000,000 and silver, that's got to be a lot. But how about this next one? Quantities of bronze and iron too great to be weighed, and wood and stone. It was like if you were to go to the sand on the seashore and I were to say, count it and tell me how much it is. You'd say, there's too much. Why even bother counting it? It's a whole lot. David looked at the wood and stone and the iron that had been gathered and said, I think we've got enough, but it's too much to even bother counting it. The thing is, this was just stage one or phase one of his capital campaign. David looked at everything that he had already gathered, and then there was phase two. He opened up his own treasury, and he added in hundreds of thousands of pounds of gold and silver and more stone and more wood, more building materials, so that uncountable number became even greater. This was just phase two. There was still phase three, where then David went to the heads of the households of the people in Israel, the people who had control of their own treasuries. And he said, it's our final phase. We need just a little bit more. Open up what you have and give. And the people responded. And the amazing thing is, when we get rid of the talent idea and we start counting things in pounds, then these things get a little bit more astounding. At the end of the day, after those three phases of that capital campaign, this is what was in the storehouses ready to be used for the temple. 8 million pounds of gold. Whoa. 76 million pounds of silver. I didn't do the math to figure out what that would be worth in dollars, but billions and billions of dollars. More bronze, more iron, more wood and stone than you could ever count. The people had given so much, and you'd have to wonder if they asked the question, was this worth it? As beautiful as that building is, as amazing as its dimensions are because they come from God, as great as it was used for all those years, this temple is not around anymore today. This building was destroyed. All of the gold was looted. The mock-up that we have here is our best guess based on what God gives us in Scripture, but maybe it didn't look exactly like that. All that's left from that building and those billions and billions in today's dollars that were given is the record. So you'd look back at the past and ask the question, was it all worth it? After all of that, and we've got a picture to show for it? What we get to look at today from 1 Kings chapter 8 is we get to see the very end of a worship service that Solomon is leading for the people. And at the very end, as he blesses the people, he says this. During his blessing that I read for you today, he says, God is never going to leave you. God has turned your heart to him. And that message is absolutely priceless. What we get to hear every time that we come to worship are those words too. God's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake you. Your heart is constantly being turned towards him. And no amount of gold or silver or decisions or time could ever equate that priceless message. If you were to read all of 1 Kings chapter 8, you'd get a full picture of what's going on in that worship service. And what I find really interesting is you get to see a lot of neat parallels from the way that they worshiped in the Old Testament to the way that we worship today. At the very beginning near the beginning of our worship, right before I read the word, I always say this greeting: "The Lord be with you." And maybe you already had it in your head, or in your heart. You wanted to respond, and also with you, because it's kind of like something that we say every single Sunday. We have that greeting: "The Lord be with you," and also with you. If you go to the very beginning of 1 Kings chapter 8, Solomon started with a greeting that was similar. He used different words, but he wanted to tell them the same thing. Here's what Solomon said in 1 Kings 8:15. He said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his own hand has fulfilled what he promised with his own mouth to my father David." You know what he was reminding the people of? The Lord is with you. He's been with you. He kept his promises. You'll notice that 1 Kings 8, this is verse 15. And if you notice the sermon text, it's all the way at 1 Kings 8, verse 56 and 57 and following. So there's 40 verses in between there. And you know what Solomon did next? He preached a sermon, just like I'm preaching to you. And he had a theme. And the theme was simply this: God keeps his promises. God had kept his promise to David, that David would gather all of the things for the temple, but his son would build it. And now Solomon got to stand there that day and say, look at the promise that God kept. The temple is built. Solomon, David's son, had done it. And the worshipers there that day would have thought about all of the other promises that God kept. That God kept his promises to them in Egypt. God kept his promises to them through their wandering in the wilderness. God kept his promise to them when they looked at a snake and they lived. God kept his promise to them when they went into the promised land and they're led by judges and now by kings. When Solomon said all of that, the Lord is with you, they were remembering all of the times that God had kept his promise. They heard that in the house of the Lord. After Solomon got done preaching his sermon, he got down on his knees before the altar and he raised his arms up to heaven and he prayed. He prayed a prayer very similar to the prayer of the church that we pray here in worship, where I pray a prayer that focuses on the things God has done in the past for our church. It asks God for things that we need now, currently, and for people who might need those prayers. And then it prays for the future things of this church. Solomon did that too. He got down on his knees and he prayed a prayer for the people, for the church. And then after that, you heard what Solomon did. After all those prayers and after all those supplications, Solomon got up and he turned to the people and he blessed them. Not the same blessing that we have. May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine on you. A little different, but a blessing nonetheless. Listen to the blessing of Solomon. Solomon said to the people from the sermon text, "May the Lord our God be with us, as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us, nor forsake us." What an amazing blessing. What wonderful words to hear in God's house that day, thousands of years ago. What wonderful words to hear today, especially when you take into account that in this sinful, broken world, throughout the week, so many things leave us, and so many things leave us forsaken. Maybe you remember a little over 15 years ago when our economy crashed and we went into that big bad recession of 2008. Maybe you were one of those people who looked at your portfolio and you said, oh no, everything has left. I'm left forsaken. I guess I've been hearing that maybe things are a little tumultuous and something like that could potentially happen. Of course, that's always in the predictions. But if it were, if you had to look at the bank account and you say, uh-oh, that was my nest egg. That's what I was hoping for, and now it's left. I'm left forsaken. Or you could look at it this another way. Sometimes disaster strikes, and it leaves us with a loved one gone, whether someone advanced in years or someone young. And what are you left to do when that relationship is done in this world? To feel like you've been left and left forsaken. Or you think about our interpersonal relationships that we have in this world, and a friend says a word to you that hurts after all of the work that you've put into that relationship. And you know that it's broken. You know that you're going to have to move on, but you feel left and forsaken. In this world of sin, throughout the week, these things come into our lives, leaving us feeling empty. Whether that's losing some physical stuff, whether that's losing a relationship, or whether that's someone coming to you and sinning against you. In this sinful world, that is what we deal with. But then you get to come to worship once a week, and hopefully in your own home around the Bible, and you get to be comforted with these words: may the Lord never leave you. May the Lord never forsake you. And we know that this is the one person, the one being, the one God who will do that. And we need that reminder all of the time. I can give you a story or an example to illustrate this. About 2 weeks ago, when I was getting the church building set up for our evening Bible camp, Camp Compassion, my wife came over with the stroller and the two girls, and they went into the lower lobby. And my daughter, Emma, she looked at the crucifix that we have in the lower lobby. And she pointed to it, and she said, "There's Jesus, dying on the cross." Well, that was pretty cool for me to hear that later. That unprompted, she said something like that. Later that night, as my wife told the story during their bedtime prayers, Jesus always comes up in some way. And when they were praying, and when Jesus came up, Emma asked this question: "Where did Jesus go?" And my wife explained, well, Jesus is in your heart. He's with you. Jesus is all around us all the time. Jesus is in heaven, but he's here too. And Emma kind of looked at her, I guess, quizzically and said, Jesus is at church, dying on the cross. For as cute as that story might be, and it might give you a little bit of a chuckle, it does illustrate something that we need a reminder early and often. That Jesus isn't just at church. Jesus isn't just in heaven. Jesus didn't just do something 2,000 years ago on a cross. Jesus wasn't just a good guy that we can learn from. Jesus is with you right now through faith in your heart. Jesus is with you when you open up your portfolio and it looks like it's like totally emptied out. Jesus is with you when disaster strikes. Jesus is with you when the word comes that seems to break a relationship. Jesus is with you through faith because he loved you so much that he would stretch out his arms and die for you on the cross to forgive all your sin. Someone who loves you that much, he's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake you. And we need to hear that reminder early and often. You get to hear that at home from family members. You get to hear that from Christian friends. You get to hear that when you crack open the Bible during your home devotions. But here, once a week in this building, you might get to hear it the most strongly. You might get to hear it the most simply. You might get to hear it where it touches you the most effectively. Is it worth it to have a building like this, God's house, where so many people, and we want as many people as possible, to be here, to get that reminder that we need? May the Lord be with you. May he never leave you. May he never forsake you. Oh, it's worth it. Solomon's blessing wasn't done. He blessed the people with that good news. And then he reminded them of this. He said, may he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him, and keep the commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. One of the things that I love about the order of operations here for how Solomon blessed the people, he first blessed the people and said, the Lord's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake you. Then he turned to the people and what that changes in their hearts. I wonder if you've ever had this where you've read the Old Testament or you've got the impression from the Old Testament That the only reason that the Israelites were ever trying to follow God's laws was because they were like afraid of his heavy hand or something like that. Well, here we get a section where we see that that's not the case at all. Here we get a section where Solomon says, look at all of the good things God has done. How he was with us through the desert. How he was with us as we got into the promised land. How he was with us so that that temple could be dedicated. And he blessed the people. And now he's not going to leave you. Now he's not going to forsake you. And now is where we get to focus on what that does to a person. How that changes a heart. Maybe another way to put that blessing is this way. That good news is what results in a changed heart. I mean, after hearing that good news, that Jesus is with you when this world leaves you left and forsaken. After hearing that good news, that Jesus was with you when you sinned and you felt like you could never be forgiven. Jesus is with you in those moments where you feel left and forsaken. That good news is going to leave us to do one thing, to have our hearts turned to God. Not being obedient to him because we're afraid of a heavy hand, but being obedient to him because we know that it gives God glory. We know that it's a way to say thanks to him. There's nothing left for a Christian to do. As we get to focus on those words and we get to ask the question, is it worth it? It is very worth it to have a space where you can come all the days of your life and to be reminded of these words. God will never leave you. God will never forsake you. God has turned your heart to him. Hearing those words just one time, but you get to hear them every week. That is priceless. Amen.